Hi everyone and welcome back to the Secret Sunday session. Today I am joined by Brock McLean. Lovely for you to jump on today, Brock, and talk to us about your story, your journey coming from professional athlete into the space that you're jumping into now. But before we dive into everything, who are you? What do you do with yourself? For those people that have no idea what you said, firstly, did I get the last name right or did I
You
screw it
did,
up?
yeah, McLean, spot on. So well done there. Better than I get McLean all the time. So you've nailed that. So well done, Ashley. But I mean, yeah. So as you said, my name's Brock McLean. Currently, I'm a married father of two. I'm an operations manager for the Johns Lyng Group for one of their building units. Once upon a time, I kicked a footy for a living. So I got drafted into the AFL when I was 17. I played for Melbourne for 6 years, played 94 games there. And then got traded to Carlton, where I spent 5 years and played another 63 games. So I ended up I had an 11-year career and just over 150 games. And now I am a father of two, married to a beautiful wife, and loving life with them up north now, which we moved up to Brisbane from Melbourne about 2 years ago.
Incredible. It sounds like such a journey, such a different journey. It's changed, it sounds like multiple times. But I want you to take me back to the first moments, obviously, when we talk about your career, jumping into the AFL and getting drafted, how was that experience? And was it something that you always dreamed of? You wanted to be an professional AFL player?
Yeah, I pretty much had a footy in my hand as early, as I can remember. I think I started Vic Kick, which is now Oz Kick back when I was 4. Footy was in our blood. My pop played at Carlton. He played in 2 premierships there, was chairman of selectors in the 60s. My uncle played at Carlton before moving to Richmond. He played at Carlton in the 60s and then moved to Richmond in the 70s. His brothers, so my dad and his brothers were very handy footballers. Dad, unfortunately, retired early because of injury. So it was pretty much almost written that I was going to play footy, and whether I got to the AFL or not was a different question. But so that was always a dream. And as a 17-year-old, to hear your name get read out at the national draft with your mum and dad sitting next to you was an extremely proud moment. And a big family. Dad's one of 7, so we all met later that day at the Anglers Tavern in Maribyrnong, and tipped a few in to celebrate. But I was at training on Monday morning and ready to start the hard work and move on to hopefully playing out a long career. And it was a fantastic experience and something that I'll never forget.
It sounds like there's a long family history there, obviously, of people playing professional league. Did you feel a pressure with that?
The biggest, certainly my dad was very hard on me, growing up. I think he was really keen for me to not repeat the same mistakes, that he did when he was younger. So you could say in a nice way, he was a hard taskmaster. Always driving me to be better. Always driving me to be never content. So, but the biggest pressure that I felt was from myself. Like I had high expectations on myself. Probably because of that, and probably just because of the way that I'm built. I was never satisfied. I was, no matter how well you played or how well your season was going, you're always looking to improve, always looking to get better. On the one hand, I'm really thankful for that, because from a football perspective, it probably allowed me to have a career as long as I did. But on the other hand, from a mental health perspective, it didn't work. That type of attitude and that type of approach didn't work well for me. So I'm thankful in one way for my football career, but things didn't work out too well from the other perspective. But everything's all good and well now.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because we do see this a lot, and I find that it's the traits and the attitude and the personality drivers that some of us have, not all of us. When we put it to something that is effective, it can get us really great results, and it can give us this drive and this chase and this motivation that keeps us hungry for wanting more. And that's praised. That discipline and that motivation is praised by a community. But as you said, sometimes when that's not there, when it comes to your mental health, that trait doesn't just silence itself. It
Mm,
becomes part of your everyday in your life, and learning to manage that in other aspects of your life can be really hard to
mm.
even dull that down, as we said, when it is praised.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as an athlete, you always had that little voice there, in
Mm,
your head when it was, you got to get up at 5 to train in the off season. That little voice was there, and it was like, you're constantly telling it to be quiet and to go away. And from that perspective, it worked. It worked well because it was a voice related to, effort or training or intensity or commitment or to discipline. When it came to my mental health, there was those voices were there who I was trying to push away, but something as important, as mental health, and it works in a totally different, way to, being an elite athlete, that constant pushing away of those voices, and just suppressing them, and trying to ignore them and move on from them. It doesn't work like that. It just makes things worse in
mm,
the end. So, I'm not an isolated story in the world of elite athletes. I've met many people, former athletes along the way who struggled with eating disorders, who struggled with depression, who struggled with, life after their chosen sport, because things that work so well for you as an athlete don't that same way of approaching things don't work well for your mental health.
mm. So, where do you think for you it started to slip? Because you talk about your AFL career giving you this motivation and this drive while also dealing with your mental health struggles. Where did it come undone? Like in me, I think having a step back and looking at that, well, it must have been when you retired, because you take away that aspect, and then what do you have left? You have all these voices, and what are you
Yeah,
using to cope with it?
yeah. Look, for me, the source of my issue was always my self worth. So, I felt while I was playing footy, I attached my self worth to football. You're at the very apex of what you're doing. You can't go any higher in the world than playing AFL football. So I felt worthy. Once I started to experience some really sort of serious and long term injuries, without having football there, those doubts over my self worth, those questions over my self worth, who am I, what is my value as a person, really started to creep in. When I wasn't playing footy, when I was injured, and I was someone who never really handled difficult emotions or challenging emotions very well. I never confronted them. I could never just sit with them and be with them. I always tried to avoid or self-medicate through. It started out as alcohol, and then alcohol worked for a little bit. When that stopped working, that turned to drugs, and then you know because I was a very all or nothing person when I was partying and when I was using drugs and when I was alcohol, I was a bit of the life of the party, and I became quite popular when I was doing that, and that in itself became another source of self worth. For me, I felt good because people wanted to be with me and they wanted to party with me and they enjoyed being around, you know, my company. So it's so complex in the sense that I was doing one thing that was so detrimental to my physical and mental health, but I felt that I was getting a lot out of it from a self-worth perspective because I was, popular. And, for someone who didn't feel like I had any self-worth, those types of, feelings, or, being around people who you felt like they wanted to be around you was a nice feeling.
Mm. Yeah, it's tough. And you hear it, as you mentioned, so often that it's a catch, right? It's you know the things that you're pursuing aren't sustainable and aren't helping your overall mental health, but you're getting a return, and you know what it feels like when you don't have that return. You know the lack of self-worth that is
Yeah.
there. And so for you, as you obviously mentioned, you struggled with self-worth for quite a long time, but when did you ever think that it actually became an issue that you needed to deal with? And did you talk to someone about it or open up about it?
It wasn't until I think it was like 3 years after I retired that I realised that I probably needed to seek, professional help. I mean, looking back and knowing everything that I know now, like there wasn't a lot of information around, mental health, in those elite athlete environments. I think, knowing what I know, I reckon I started to experience symptoms of depression probably as early as 19 or 20, wanting to isolate myself, from friends. And, I remember, I could go a week without, answering my phone, and, my parents are sort of, worrying and wondering, sort of what was going on, but it always just played off. No, I've just had a big week of training. I'm really tired. I've been sleeping a lot and resting a lot. So those symptoms I can certainly trace back to when I was 19 or 20, I
And did
think.
you
But
believe that? Like when you were at that age, when you were telling people, I'm just tired, it's just training. Did you believe that yourself, that that was the reason?
oh, no, I knew that I didn't want to speak. I just didn't want to
Mm,
speak to people. I just wanted to be left alone. But in my dad's side of the family, we grew up with very blue collar. So mental health was something that was just made up. It was a fantasy. We were always taught that no matter what the problem or no matter what the issue is, you just work through it and you don't complain about it, and you just get on. You get on with it. And I used to use the term perspective a lot. So someone out there has got it worse than I am, so I've got nothing to complain about. But you realize along the way that it's not a competition. If that was how things worked in the world, then only the person with the worst circumstances or the worst experiences or the worst symptoms deserve any type of sympathy or care and love and attention. So it took me a long while to figure that out, but that's just happens through experience and getting a bit older and a bit wiser.
mm. And you mentioned that there's family history there of not opening up, but did you believe that people would want to listen to you as well? Did you know how to communicate or express that to people?
No, I didn't. I always struggled talking about myself. I always felt like I was a burden, and I wasn't worthy of that attention, and I just didn't know where. I didn't really know, where to start. I remember Dad, sometimes trying to talk to me, what's going on, what's going on in your brain, and I just, the more someone poked me, the further it just made me go, inside, and wanted to back away. So, and even when I first started seeing a psychologist in 2017, like it took months, like for me to properly, open up and be really honest, with him, just because one, I felt comfortable talking about myself. And two, I just felt so much shame, just about a lot of the stuff, that I'd done, and, a lot of the mistakes, that I'd made. And, I always had this notion in my head, for me to be, worthy, I almost needed to be this, perfect human being. I needed to say the right thing all the time. I needed to do the right thing all the time and be the perfect friend all the time. And when I said the wrong thing, or I did the wrong thing, or I, maybe wasn't the best friend, like it was just very black and white. Like there was nothing in the middle. It's just, you're an awful friend, you're an awful person, and you would treat yourself, you know, accordingly, through whether it was isolation or, through self-medicating, or whatever the case was. I was never able to see anything in between. It was either the best person or you're the worst person, So,
It's interesting, and I feel shame carries such a heaviness to it. I know in my experience, when I've been ashamed to open up about what I've been through or what I've experienced, it's this heavy burden that you feel you you can't tell anyone, you can't express anything, and it eats you up inside, and it forces you to be silent. And I'm interested to hear you talk about your shame because you felt that heaviness from it. What were you ashamed of? What was that fear there?
oh, as I said, it got back to, that I wasn't, the perfect human being, and that I'd made, stupid mistakes,
What did not being
along the way.
perfect mean to you?
Oh, like just, um, from a playing perspective, I thought the only way that I could, get to a position where I could feel proud of being a footballer and be worthy as a footballer was, to play 300 games, to be a premiership player, to win a Brownlow medal, to win best and fairest. Like all these accolades were somehow going to make me whole or make me, worthy. But, I've learned along the journey that, if you're not satisfied and content, with yourself without those things, then those things are never going to make you content and whole as a person, anyway.
Mm.
So, and then just, the way that I dealt with things, the way that I drank, the way that I tried to suppress, everything. There was a lot of shame attached to that. There was just shame, associated with all of those things that I did that, made me worse from a mental health, perspective. My eating disorder, I was completely ashamed, of that, and to somehow, if I spoke about that, then somehow it would make it, real, and people would judge me, for it. But you learn along the way that a lot of these, things that you struggle with, they're just human struggles, right? It doesn't make you any less of a human being. We all struggle with different things, and some people struggle more with other things than other people do. So,
Mm. It's a wild thing, I think, once you go through recovery or you're going on a journey of learning more about yourself, that you
yeah,
realize it's just part of the human experience
yeah,
and that a lot of it's just head noise.
yeah,
And when you start to venture out and to share more about your experience, you realize how much people are there to support you and accept you for all your colors and all your mess. And I think that's the beautiful part, is often proving to ourselves when we are the 0 to 100 people that people will prove your head noise wrong. And unless you start opening up and sharing with people and letting people into your life, you're never going to be able to experience that.
yeah.
But that is almost the most beautiful experience, when you give people that opportunity to be let in and the
Mm.
opportunity to accept you for no matter how you turn up.
Yeah, I honestly think that the probably one of the biggest thing that contributes to mental health is that sense of connection. So when we finally when we finally open up and we talk about our issues, it offers that opportunity to truly connect with someone, not just surface connection, right? We're talking about the weather, or you're talking about how your day, how's your day, how's work, all that type of surface level stuff. When you truly get deep and open up about your struggles and what it is that you're feeling, it's amazing how many people out there often go through these similar issues, right? And you're able to connect on a much, deeper level, and you walk away after those conversations just feeling really wholesome. Depending on who the person is, like whether if it's a really close friend or if it's a family member, and you're connecting on that deeper level, like you walk away from those conversations with your love bucket full, and
Mm.
that makes such a difference to your well-being. And how you feel about yourself, and how you feel about yourself in the context of the general population, that you're not the only one struggling. You're not the only one going through that, which is, you'll often hear a lot of people who talk about, their experiences with depression and mental illnesses, feeling like they're the only person in the world going through that. But when we open up, we quickly realize there are a lot of people out there suffering, and not that you want anyone else to suffer, but it is comforting and reassuring that you're not the only one going through that.
Oh, it definitely is. And as you said, that one word, connection, I feel it's what we're all longing for. And in
Yeah.
a modern era, it's what we need more of, considering the digital world that we've now become accustomed to. Which, in saying that, is kind of how I, connected with you and come to know a bit more about your story, in terms of the way that you've now come out and shared your experience with an eating disorder. Something that I'm very much in this space and understand the stereotypes that are involved with eating disorders. And not often, unfortunately, men do speak up about their experience with an eating disorder. As you mentioned, there's a lot of shame attached to it for anyone going through it, but particularly we don't see it amongst men. And I'm interested to firstly see how your journey with your eating disorder unfolded, how it came about, and if you recognize that you were actually experiencing an eating disorder.
Yeah, I mean, I knew what I was doing, wasn't normal. I knew what bulimia was. It didn't start as bulimia, it started as, I had my first year at Carlton couldn't have gone any worse. Really, I wanted to trade from Melbourne to Carlton because I wanted a fresh start. Early on, it went really well. I flogged myself in the off season to get to a point where I won the time trial on day one. I thought, you know what, this is the best way to start it. But by the time the year had ended, I'd had a number of injuries just because I'd overtrained and I had to listen to my body. And the game was sort of evolving as well at the same time. So, I'd lost a lot of leg speed, through my injuries. I wasn't quick to start with. The game was getting quicker. So the coaches thought, for me to get back to a point where, I could rediscover some of that explosiveness or, a little bit of leg speed, that they thought I needed to lose a few kilos. And bear in mind, at the time, I was playing at about 85 kilos, but I naturally weighed 90. So I was running pretty lean to begin with, but they thought it would be good for me if I played at, say, 81 or 82. So to lose another 3 or 4 kilos. And against sort of the nutritionist's advice, he thought it was going to do more harm than good. I agreed to it because, in my mind, the only way of getting back to a point of being, worthy and being back, and getting back to playing footy again was, to stay in the good books of the coaches. This was their suggestion. This was their idea. And if I went against it, I'm going to piss them off, and all I wanted to do was get back to playing. So, I just became, I was already pretty disciplined, with what I ate, but I just became really unhealthily, obsessed, weighing everything, weighing myself before meals, after meals, before training, after training, which is what wasn't unusual, but and then, suppressing any urges, that I might have. I was eating so clean for weeks on end, but no one's perfect, right? We all need to eat a little bit of, junk food and de-stress, but I was suppressing a lot of those cravings. But after, you can only do that for so long, so I'll do that for maybe a month at a time, and then I'll just go on these really unhealthy eating binges where I'll just, instead of just having a packet of chips or a bag of lollies, I would eat 2 bags of lollies and 2 bags of chips and McDonald's and ice cream, and then afterwards I would just get the guilt, and I would go for these 10 or 20K runs, which to burn it all off, because I was so scared that I was going to put on weight, and but coming from a lot of injuries the previous year, putting that extra strain on my body on top of our already huge loads wasn't ideal. So so from there I was like, well, how can I, what can I do if I go through one of these eating binges again? I started taking, when I did, I would start to take laxatives. I would take like a whole box, of laxatives, which, it's crazy, right? Like when you think about it now, but so I would, I'd do that over the weekend, and I'd rock up to preseason training on a Monday and, have these 3-hour grueling sessions in, 30, 35-degree heat, and, dealing with the worst stomach cramps just because I'd chewed through a whole packet of laxatives over the weekend, and then, after a while that got to a point where I was like, well, I can't do this anymore, right? This is killing me inside. And that's when I discovered, purging my food and so it started out with the binges, but then it'll get to a point where I felt like purging almost gave me this feeling of a fresh start, of the ability to start, from scratch again. So I almost got, addicted to that feeling, and I started doing it pretty much most weeknights. But it also allowed me to truly experience guilt-free eating, because, I could sit there and eat a packet of Tim Tams and a packet of chips and then a packet of lollies and all that in a row without any guilt attached to that whatsoever, because I knew I was going to throw it up afterwards. So that in itself became, quite addictive, and even getting back to that point before of, that's, wanting to be that perfect, thinking I had to be, a perfect person to be worthy of any type of, love or self-worth. Because I didn't view myself really well, I felt like having a really good body, or having I think, when I was during that period, I think my body fat percentage was like 4.5%. So I was like ripped, and I thought being ripped would make me be more popular or more attractive to to the opposite of sex, which in turn would make me feel better about myself. So that it wasn't just one aspect of it. Was there was so many different moving parts to it, and it was a. I look back and I honestly don't know how I functioned, you know, for a couple of years. I was, most weekends I was going out and, drinking and doing drugs, after playing a game of footy, and then, being purging my food from Monday to Friday, and then doing the same thing on the weekend. But at the time, I was playing really well. I got back into the seniors. I was playing really well, and any athlete will tell you that when you were playing well, whatever you were doing, like in your normal day-to-day routine, you keep doing that until you stop playing well, because everything revolves around your performance. You're an athlete first and foremost, and the most important thing of being an athlete is your performance. So that was, from a footy perspective, I was playing really well, but from a mental health perspective, the best thing for me would have been to play like shit, because then it would have forced me to address what I was actually doing, because my performance wasn't there.
Is that hard when you're seeing your performance go so well and your coaches are, praising you and people are putting you almost on this pedestal because you're getting the outcomes, and yet all the things that you're pursuing are disordered. Like, how do
Yeah.
you then go, I need to recover from this, or I need to let go of this? Because at the moment it's giving you what you've intended to achieve.
Yeah. No, look, to be honest, I didn't care. I was prepared to do whatever it took to get back to being a footy player and playing well, because, I went through, as a kid, that was all I wanted to do. Like, it was just my ultimate, you know, goal in life. And then, as I said, my first year at Carlton couldn't have gone, any worse. My second year, I was back playing and I was getting best on ground in the VFL every week, but I couldn't break back in to the senior. So when you have it taken away from you, when you get it back and you're actually doing really well, you don't want to let it go. So if I would have done a lot of bad things, for me to be able to get back to the point where playing footy. So if that meant, you know, um, abusing drugs and alcohol on the weekend and throwing up, all my food at night time from Monday to Friday, then so be it. I was prepared to do that, to be an AFL footballer.
Knowing what you know now, would you do it differently?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I think.
Even potentially sacrificing the outcome?
Look at now that I know, like I'm pretty positive that even if I wasn't going out on the weekend and I wasn't bulimic during the week, I still would have played well. I was a good footballer. I felt like at the time I didn't truly believe in myself a lot of the time. So you feel like that's where those superstitions you know come in. It's like, well, I'm playing well, so when I'm doing this, I'm just going to keep doing it. And obviously the mental aspect of it, plays a big part. So if you truly believe that stuff is working well for you and going to make you play well, then you go out and you play well, right? So if I had done it the other thing where I was maybe meditating every day, not drinking, not abusing drugs, eating healthily, and not be so obsessed with how much I weighed, I would have played well at 85 and and 82. I would have played well at 90 instead of 85. They were just numbers. It was just a weight. So yeah, knowing everything that I know now, I definitely would have done things differently. But at the time, I was, I reckon I was pretty close-minded. As I said, I was pretty, I didn't really believe too much, in mental health. I thought it was a sign of weakness. I thought it would somehow be emasculating to talk about, my issues. So, I just put on this, no matter how bad I was feeling or how depressed I was, as soon as I'd walk into the door at the footy club, I'd put on this front, like that everything that I was okay and that I was happy and that I was my jovial, jocular self, like to have a bit of fun. I was a bit of a, bit of a knockabout, then that in itself takes its toll, because, that takes so much energy to put on this front, all the time that, some days you would just go home after training and lie in your room and just cry for hours, just because you were so exhausted and you were so, tired of putting on this front. But, I couldn't talk about that because one, I didn't know how, and two, I didn't want to, you know.
Mm. Mm. Were you ever fearful that someone was going to find out or catch you?
Um, I remember one night, you know, on the footy trip actually opening up, you know, to a teammate. We'd been drinking all day, and I'd been sort of consuming drugs as well, cocaine and ecstasy and stuff like that. So you do get a bit chatty, and you do get a bit particularly ecstasy. You do to connect with people. So I opened up to him, you know. That night at the time, just about some of the struggles. I was suicidal at times, and the struggles, that I was facing. But and that felt good at the time. But the next day, I remember almost feeling a bit ashamed, or I felt a bit funny when I first saw him, and I didn't really know how to look at him or to approach him. So I just took the approach that I just forgot that it ever, tried to forget, that it ever happened. And it was just, business as usual.
Mm. In that period of your life, if you had someone that wanted to support you or someone that was there for you, what did you need from them?
I reckon I would have needed to probably hear from someone who had gone through it, themselves, maybe another, footballer who might have been struggling with the same, type of issues, who was prepared to speak about it, you know, publicly, just to know that I wasn't the only one, sort of going through that. Because as I said before, that's what it truly felt like at the time, that I was, the only person going, through that, the only footballer, going through that. Just because it wasn't really spoken about. Like you never heard any footballers come out and speak about, and you're almost brainwashed into thinking that, people with, like a great lifestyle and money, and I was living my dream, like why why should I be depressed? I've got lots of disposable income. I get to travel overseas, for 4 to 8 weeks at the end of every off season. What do I have to be depressed about? So yeah, from a, as we were touching on before, once people open up about their struggles and their experiences, it almost gives people in similar situations, it's almost like giving them permission to be able to talk about their experiences and their issues as well, because they don't feel like they're the only one in the world going through it.
Is that what you're hoping for in sharing your story today and, being quite a strong advocate for, say, your experience with your eating disorder and your abusive relationship with alcohol and drugs during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I used to talk about this with my psych, that I said, if I ever felt in a strong enough position one day, that I would speak publicly, about it, just to be able to raise awareness, and the suicide numbers are truly horrific in Australia. 9 people every day, 7 of those are male. So that says that as a society, we're still not, the stigma is still attached, particularly to men's, mental health. It also really gives me an opportunity, to sit back and realize how far I've come, and to actually give myself a bit of, recognition and credit, just to say, you were really unwell there, for a period of your life, and you've been able to work through it and come out on the other side, and turn it around, and to a point where I'm the happiest and healthiest, I've ever been, and it offers a real opportunity to experience, that cathartic release of emotions, and that in itself is good. It's good for my well-being. It's my love bucket, and it also gives you an opportunity to appreciate, where you are now, and that everything in life happens for a reason as
Mm.
well. Like, if, as I said before, I've got an amazing life. I've got 2 beautiful kids. They're everything to me, and if going through what I did, if which has led them to me, I would go through that, 100 times over, again.
Mm.
Um, and a good analogy I use is, in in the Shawshank Redemption, where Andy Dufresne has to crawl through 500 yards of shit to get to his freedom. Sometimes we have to do that in life to get to our happy place,
Mm.
as well. So I'm very happy that I've crawled through my. God, it felt like a lot longer than 500 yards of shit, at time. But I'm glad I have, because where I am now, I'm just so happy and proud with everything, that I've got. And what I've got is my wife, my kids, family, good friends. We've got a great lifestyle up here. I pissed every cent of every dollar that I made in footy, away through drugs and alcohol and gambling and stuff like that. But, I've got so much more now than what I did, when I was a footballer.
Oh, you got me there. Oh, it's beautiful though that, as you said, perspective and how you can come through something. And when you've done it on your own and you've proven to yourself that you can get through hard things and you can come out the other side and you can now be that person, not only for other people, but for yourself, like turning up for that little boy that needed someone when he was struggling through his transition into the AFL League, and to now stand here today and be a proud man of your story and owning your story. I think that is one of the biggest gifts we can give ourselves, no matter what journey we've been through, but to stand proudly, no matter how messy it is, and to own our story and create the life and live the life that we want to live. I think is beautiful. And if you can create a family and have people with you along the way, it just makes it a bit more magical.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And, I think, getting back to that, we were talking about, connection before. Like, once I finally started opening up to my family, and my friends, it was just amazing how much more connected, that I felt, to them. And even one of the comments that, my two best mates of me at the time was just after I tried to commit suicide, and we caught up and they were like, mate, we'd been worried about you for so long, but we just had no idea how to bring it up, with you. And that in itself was a really sad comment, because I felt, well, if I had succeeded, if I did, sort of commit suicide, how much guilt that they, you know,
Mm.
might have felt. So making sure that, talking about, those experiences as well, that we check in, on the people around us that we're worried about, to make sure that we try and have that conversation with them, just to let them know that they're there, and anytime that they want to talk, that they'll listen, and that they care. I think that's one thing. Like, I think sometimes when you're really struggling, you feel like people don't care, but when it's nice to know and hear that, which can make the world of difference to someone who might be struggling in silence.
When you were going through that and in that experience, when your friends mentioned that they wanted to reach out, but they didn't know how, they didn't know what to say. What would have helped you in that situation if they sent you something? Like, what did you need from them to send you to potentially help you get out of that mindset?
Just that they were worried, maybe that they just, they were concerned, that they cared, that they loved me. I think sometimes from a male perspective, we're not very good at listening. We'll hear someone will come and talk to us, and straight away we're coming up with solutions like, oh, have you tried this? Or what about this? Or maybe try and think like this. And, whereas I think you don't need to have answers. You just need to be able to hold a space for someone, and listen to them, and ask questions, and give them the opportunity to just be heard. And don't be scared if there's a bit of silence. I think sometimes we get really uncomfortable and a bit awkward when there's just silence. There's just two of you sitting there,
Mm.
but just give them the opportunity to speak, and you don't have to come up with answers. You just have to sit there and try and empathise with them about what they're actually going through.
Mm. How are you doing that as a father to your kids and your family? Do you feel that's a whole different area that you're navigating in terms of just turning up and listening and not having to fix everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing about being a dad is just showing up, and being there. I've got two daughters. Bonning's 4.5, and Camille's 3. So right now everything's fine. But if you ask me that in 10 years' time, it could
We'll
be a
circle back around.
completely different answer. We might do a follow up in 10 years to see where I'm at.
Yeah.
and see what bunker that I'm living in. But it's I get so much. When you talk about the things that fill up my love bucket, the things that um, make me feel like just give me so much from a well-being perspective. It's time with them and Steph, you know, um, my wife, yesterday I was in Cairns for work on Friday and Saturday and I got home and it was a beautiful day here in Brisbane. So we went to the market, kids got their face painted, had to play at the park, came home, had a bit of quiet time. Then we sat outside in the afternoon and, we got the pool, the kids jumped in the pool, we had a swim. Camille was putting sunscreen, on me and stuff like that. So, those days where we just stop, we don't have to do anything. We're just there. We're in each other's company. We're spending good quality, wholesome time together. Those are the most important things for me, as a father to do, for my kids.
Mm.
So, I'm not at the point, we do listen to them. We try and understand, what's going on. But Camille's a teenager. Trying to listen to Bonnie sometimes is a bit difficult, but certainly when they get to that age where, life starts to get a bit, challenging for them, certainly just saying, just sitting there and just really trying to listen and to empathize and to sit there without, any judgments, because I want my kids to be able to come to me no matter what they've done, or no matter what it is that they're going through, and they just feel so comfortable that they're able to come and talk to me without any fear of, getting into trouble or repercussions or anything like that. Because I remember when I was a kid, I was petrified of my dad, like petrified, of him. And that's not a knock on my dad. They were just old school. It was a completely, different era. And I was just so worried about what would happen if I went to him and said, I'm in trouble or I've done this. And I don't want my girls to ever have to experience that. I want them to feel so comfortable and safe and secure that they can come and talk to me about anything, whether that's boys, whether that's drugs, whether that's alcohol. And we can sit there and just have a really open and honest conversation about what the issues are, what the consequences are, because we've been there, we've done, we've done that. Not so much me as a teenage girl, but my wife can handle that aspect of it. But I just, I want to create that really open and honest environment, where the girls can feel comfortable to talk about anything.
It's incredible. And it sounds like you're really paving the way for that as a leader and as a father for your kids. And that's amazing. I can't wait to, yeah, circle back around in 10 years and see how that's really setting
Yeah,
in.
I could have built a 10-story bunker underground, by then. So we'll soon
Yeah.
see.
Who knows where even the world's going to be at in that time frame. But it's been a phenomenal to talk to you today and to hear your story and share what has challenged you in the past and how you're recreating and rewriting that today. And I just want to congratulate you on that journey. And before I do send you off, there are a couple of questions that I do want to finish off with.
Yep.
One of them throughout it, you mentioned self-worth being such a big one for you throughout it. And I guess I'm interested now where you are in your life. Have you reached that? Have you fulfilled that mark, or do you still feel sometimes you're not meeting that standard of self-worth?
Absolutely. Like I feel at a point now where I know who I am, and I know how valuable I am. Like what I do for my wife, what I do for my kids, how loyal I am to my family, and to my friends, and what I provide them, and what value I bring, you know, um, as a human being. That self worth has certainly there. It's not to say that during periods of sometimes stress and when that little voice pops back in your head and starts to ask the question again, that it is still there, but I've just, I've gotten to a point in my life now where you can deal with those voices and those challenging, thoughts a lot more therapeutically and effectively than how I did it, um, you know, 10 years ago. So I think, yeah, certainly it's taken a while, but I'm at a point in my life now where I feel worthy. I am. I'm definitely worth love for my family and my friends, and and I know what value and um, that I am to them.
Mm. I guess the other big ticket question that people are always after is the how. You have experienced so much in terms of what you've been through to try and support your mental health the best way that you know how with the tools that you had. But how did you overcome it? What did you do? How did you recover, or what started your journey to recovering from bulimia? And what did that look like?
Just it's trial and error, like finding out what works for you and what doesn't. The first step is actually admitting that you've got issues and going to seek, professional help. I still talk to my psychologist, pretty much every week to this day, even if I'm feeling great, I'm feeling like I'm on top of the world. We still just talk about what's going on in my life and how the kids are, how the family is, how I'm feeling, you know, those types of things. But I think once I set my expectations a lot more realistically, like I was expecting to get better within a month, of seeing a
Oh, we
psychologist,
all
right?
think that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Then you have a setback, you revert back to some old behaviors. You think, nah, everything's pointless. What am I even doing this for? So once I set, I was working in the stock market at the time, and my psychologist used a really good analogy for me. He said, mate, when do you ever see a stock price, when you ever look at a share price chart, go in a straight line, sort of, northeast? I said, never. He said, right. He said, you see peaks and troughs. That's what your recovery is going to look like. There are going to be days where you feel like you're making great progress, and weeks and months. Then you have a slight little step back, right? You might revert back to, an old behavior, or, you might self-medicate with drugs and alcohol because you're not feeling that great. It's completely normal. Like you've got these ingrained habits that you've been using for so long for your life. You can't expect to unlearn them, within 3 months, within 2 weeks. So I think once I started to set my expectations, things just happened. There were one part of my life I'd get under control, and then, might have a setback, but then the next part, then the next part, and then, suddenly it's 4 or 5 years later, and, you're at a point in your life, um, where you feel like you're on top, of a lot of your issues. But getting to the actual root cause of your issue, if you don't do that, then you're not going to get better. So once, I think initially it was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to take, I'm going to do my meditation every day. I'm going to see a psych every week, and I'm going to take my Lexapro, every day, and that's going to be, enough. Whereas, if you're only treating symptoms or just treating the stuff that's on the surface level, you're not actually getting deep into the root cause. It's all for nothing. So once I addressed my issues of self-worth and how I looked at myself, and I think the light bulb moment for me was I was listening to a podcast by a lady by the name of Kristen Neff, and she's like one of the world's most prominent, I guess, researchers or experts on self-worth. And I listened to a podcast of hers, and there are so many light bulb moments within, you know, that podcast that, one, I stopped blaming myself for who I was, that it wasn't my fault, that some people struggle with it because of X, Y, Z. And then, she used this comparison tool of, talking about self-worth versus self-esteem, and how self-esteem is based on the premise that, you have a high self-esteem because you're particularly good at something. You might be good at art, or you might be good at sport, or you might be, good at maths, or whatever the case is. Whereas self-worth teaches you that no matter what you're good at, it doesn't matter if you're ordinary, extraordinary, you're a human being and you're worthy of self-love. So I think, that was another, important thing to hear for me, that just really, once I listened to those things and I could really stop blaming myself, everything really took off, after that.
Mm. I love that. I love that, really, the switch around the perspective of self-worth and self-esteem. And so often I think a lot of us look at it in different aspects because, once again, as you said, we're striving for other people to love us, to want us, to give us that approval, when
Yeah.
really it starts within.
Yeah.
And that's where, if you're willing to do the work and you're willing to understand yourself and all your levels and why you turn up the way that you turn up, I think you get to a point sometimes where you just want a better life for yourself. You're experiencing the mundane, or you're experiencing quite a struggle with your mental health, and you just get in this cycle where you just think, I don't want this for myself anymore. I want a different life, and I want to see if I'm able to create that different life. And it's amazing that you've jumped on that journey to explore that and look where it's landed you today.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was certainly the point where I started talking to a psych. It was 2017. I was like, I can't keep doing this anymore. This is like this. I'm tired. I'm sick of feeling like this. Like something
Mm.
needs, to change. And that was the moment where I guess the journey to getting better and making a better life for myself started. And I think it was probably 4 or 5 years later that things were, truly, I
Mm.
was truly on top of everything.
Do you still feel like you have to manage your 0 to 100 personality?
Yep. Yeah. Just um, learning to
It
learning to
just latches onto different things.
learning to slow down.
Mm.
At times, and learning to, I guess, to listen to my body and listen to what's going on. As well. Like, I'm back into the gym and I'm really enjoying that. And I've put my back out recently, and that little voice in my head is like, go back to the gym. Like, you'll be fine. Your back will be fine. Like, just push through it, push through it, push through it. Whereas the sensible side of me is taken over now. It's like, no, mate, just get it right, and you can go back to the gym, when your back's right. So, yeah, it's certainly learning to live, in a bit more moderation, has come with its challenges. But, I feel like I'm at a point where it's, I can manage that, um, that old all or nothing personality to something which is a bit more balanced and a bit more in the middle.
It's definitely ongoing. What do you want people to know about eating disorders?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just I think because of, what you would see, in the media or in movies or any type of, arts perspective, that it's not just women who suffer, from an eating disorder. It's a human condition. There's so much overlap in, a lot of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, getting trapped in these self-ruminating thoughts that you feel like you can't, escape from, or these control mechanisms that, that if you are a male, suffering from an eating disorder, you're not any less of a male. You're just a human being suffering from a human condition. And that, the first step to getting better is seeking help, and it's not going to be emasculating, and it's not a sign of weakness. It just means that you get on top of your issues, and you actually get back to controlling your own life rather than it controlling you. So just go and seek help, because I mean, we build this narrative up in our head. It's like, I remember when I first went and spoke to the psychologist, and it was like, oh my God, this is going to be so daunting, and oh, what's he going to think of me, and blah, blah, blah. And then you do it and you come out, you're like, really? I was worried about that. Like, I feel amazing. I feel like, I've got 10 kilos,
Mm.
lifted off my shoulder. It hasn't fixed any of my issues, but I haven't bottled everything up, and that's the biggest issue at times. So,
Mm.
I can guarantee that once you go and actually start talking about your issues, that life will just become a little bit easier,
Mm.
for yourself, and it just makes that road to recovery so much more accessible and so much more achievable.
Provides hope. It's so important. And thank I honestly, from the space that I work in, thank you for sharing your story and being an advocate in this space, because a lot of people, a lot of young men, I feel, are currently suffering in silence and
Mm-hmm.
afraid to speak out. But it's people like you that are stepping forward and owning your story, that are paving the way for people to get those extra weights off their shoulder. So really thank you.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And my last question, that comes back to, I guess, the aspect that we've talked about, family and connection. But often we have this idea of leaving a legacy in terms of what we want the community to remember us as. But you've spoken so much about how much your family means to you in this life that you've created. What do you want you girls to remember you as, to think of their dad as, to know that they can come to you for?
That I was just always there. That the dad was always there. Anytime that they needed me, that I always made them feel safe. That I always made them feel, loved, and wanted. Um, and no matter what was going on, in their lives, what challenges they were facing, how they were feeling, whether they'd made mistakes or whether they were, doing well, it didn't matter the circumstances. Their dad was always going to be there no matter what. So that's just what I want my girls to remember me by when, hopefully I'm a very old and frail and whittled man, and they're putting me into the crematorium and spreading my ashes somewhere. I hope they say that about me.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today, and as I said, sharing of your story and being vulnerable and open with owning your story. It's such a privilege to be able to hear it and share it with our community. So I really appreciate everything you're doing, and I hope that you never stop shouting and sharing what you know, what you've learned along the journey.
Cheers. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No worries. And thank you as well, everyone, for listening and tuning in for another episode of the Secret Sunday Session. We will catch you guys all next time.